We breathe in the light as we start part 3 of our series based on Father Richard Rohr's book called The Naked Now. And the first week we explored the collision of opposites, was embracing the paradox in spiritual life. Last week we talked about practicing heaven now, what it looks like to practice heaven in our daily, messy, sometimes tragic world. And today we look at what Richard Rohr talks about and calls the radical perceptual shift. The radical perceptual shift. So I wear glasses, and they're progressive, right? You know what that is, right? So there's three things. There's three fields, if you will. And I remember the first time I had them on, how annoyed I was. Right? I couldn't walk down a step. Right? Who else has progressives, right? Oh! Look around. Remember where you are. So, right? Okay, so now that everybody knows, right? What was it like walking down a flight of stairs, right? Or like just remembering to kind of just tilt your head a little bit. For those of you who don't, bless you. But and I was so annoyed. It was like, oh, I don't want to do this. I'll just go back to bifocals. I can handle 2 different fields, right? But the 3 was really annoying, and I didn't want to do it. But I persisted, right? I made adjustments, and now it is second nature, right? So now it's like I don't know how I ever did without them, because I persisted. And experiencing the radical perceptual shift is much the same. We make the decision, we enter into the practice, and we persist. So the radical perceptual shift is becoming fully and completely aware that the presence and power of God is within us and all around us. And it's entering into that practice so that in every moment of our lives, we are aware of that presence and that power of God that is within us and all around us, that moves through the world as us. But we do need to make that shift. Here's a foundational Zen story that you have probably heard before, but it fits so well. A university professor went to visit a famous Zen master. And while the master quietly served tea, the professor talked about Zen. And he kept talking and talking and talking. And the master poured the visitor's cup to the brim and then kept pouring. And the professor watched the overflowing cup until he could no longer restrain himself. "Stop," he said, "it's overfull. No more will go in." And the master replied, "You are like this cup. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?" This story speaks to the Buddhist teaching of beginner's mind. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. From Scripture, Matthew chapter 18. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" He called a little child and had him stand among them. And he said, "I tell you the truth. Unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." Now, these 2 teachings speak to the very same thing. When we come to the teacher with an already full cup, we are not receptive to the kingdom of heaven. Right? How's that for mixing metaphors? When we come to the teacher already knowing everything, when we come as an expert, there's no room for us to expand. There's no room for us to grow and to learn and to enter into that kingdom of heaven. So just a little bit about heaven. We talked about practicing heaven last week, but a little bit about heaven. Our co-founder, Charles Fillmore, defined it as a state of consciousness in which the soul and body are in harmony with divine mind. Let's just kind of breathe that in a moment. A state of consciousness in which the soul and body are in harmony with divine mind. You get a glimpse of what it might feel like if that were the case all the time? Jesus in the Gospels tells us repeatedly that heaven is a state of consciousness. He says the kingdom of heaven is at hand, and the kingdom of God is in the midst of you, meaning it's within you. And he says, unless you become like a child of God, like a child, you won't enter the kingdom of heaven. Just like a child, when we start to learn anything for the first time, we are fresh and curious and open to all possibilities. Our mind is not yet solid with the concepts and opinions and certainties that later come. This is beginner's mind when we are open and receptive. It's an awakened mind, right? It's beyond concept and opinions. It's a mind that is not ruffled when it doesn't know the answers, right? Don't we always want to know the answers? Or is it just me? No. And how many of us are uncomfortable with saying, I don't know, right? 3 of the most powerful words in our language. I don't know. I don't know. So much of us, so much of the time we get stuck in thinking we should know something, or we know everything. You know? Do you know somebody, or maybe you are somebody who thinks they know everything? I've been around some of those people. I've been one of those people. We get so confident in our knowledge that it gets in the way of learning, right? Our certainty gets in the way of us connecting with each other. Our cup is so full of what we think we already know, there's no room for new wonders, right? So children believe that anything is possible. Children delight in helping. Most of the time, they don't even ask you for details of what you're doing. They see you busy and they say, can I help? Right? That's the mind of a child. Children accept others for what they are. They don't need a reason to love others. They have a sense of wonder. Everything is new. And they're very teachable, yeah? Their cups are never full. And their favorite question is, why? Joan remembers it very well. They're always curious, willing to ask, not afraid of making mistakes. Most of us, many of us, are afraid of making mistakes. Again, I'm not the only one, right? The Reverend Jim Wallace, the editor of the Sojourners magazine, tells a story he swears is true of a young priest leading his first Mass in his first parish. He approaches the microphone, taps it hesitantly, and mutters, there's something wrong with this microphone. And the congregation replies, and also with you. When we approach our lives like little children with a beginner's mind, we know that mistakes will be made. We know that we'll make mistakes. But when we have beginner's mind, I'm tripping on my flats. I'm not even wearing heels. When we enter into beginner's mind, we know that we're on the edge of discovery because we're at the edge of our knowledge and our experience. When we say those words, I don't know, we have something to learn, right? We're on the edge of it all. That's why I don't know is so powerful. So to enter the kingdom of heaven, we need to realize that. We need to come to that we are perfect in our imperfection, and we will make mistakes. We must be teachable, however, and we must be humble. When we stop operating from our ego, from needing to be right, from fear of making a mistake, our minds are much more open to spiritual truth. Spirit has a way easier way of getting in there when our minds are consciously open. When we come to Spirit with an empty cup, we learn to see how the mystics see, which is the subtitle of Richard's book. More thoughts on seeing through the eyes of a child. When I look at a patch of dandelions, I see a bunch of weeds that are going to take over my yard. My kids see flowers for mom and blowing white fluff you can wish on. When I hear music I love, I know I can't carry a tune and don't have much rhythm, so I sit self-consciously and listen. My kids feel the beat and dance. They sing out the words. If they don't know them, they make them up. When I feel the wind at my face, I brace myself against it. I feel it messing up my hair and pulling me back when I walk. My kids close their eyes, spread their arms, and fly until they fall to the ground laughing. When I see a mud puddle, I step around it. I see muddy shoes and clothes and dirty floors. My kids sit in it. They see dams to build, rivers to cross, and worms to play with. When was the last time you saw a mud puddle as an adventure? I have a vague recollection. But that's what little children do. They see everything as a new frontier. They rejoice in learning new things and are singularly unafraid of doing it wrong. They are joyful in the trying. But what happens, and it begins in earnest in our teenage years, and for most of us, it cements in our adulthood. We lose that sense of innocent wonder. Our culture moves us quite rapidly from being like little children into adulthood, becoming more and more responsible for our own lives and the lives of others. After all, there are bills to be paid, there are jobs to be gone to, lawns to be mowed, meals to be made. For many of us, whether we like it or not, most of our waking hours are spent taking care of business, and we put off the enjoyment until later. I had a conversation with my sister who lives in New Jersey. She's just a little bit younger than me, and she's a very busy woman. She gets up at 5 o'clock in the morning. She sometimes doesn't get home until 6 at night. And then she's a very organized person, and everything has its place. And so she comes home and makes sure the house is straight. If there are any dishes left in the sink, she does the dishes. If there's any paperwork to be done, she really enjoys having everything in order. She does the paperwork. She not only takes care of all of her bills, but she takes care of the paperwork of her mother-in-law, who is in Alzheimer's care. And her husband is going through a cancer challenge, so she takes care of all of his hospital bills and makes sure everything is, copacetic there and all of that. So to say all that is to say that she's very busy and doesn't have a whole lot of time for hobbies. So she mostly just jumps, she just mostly falls in front of the television at like 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock at night, and her bedtime's at 9:30. So I tell you all that to just relate that we spoke the other day, and she told me, you know what? I don't have any hobbies. And somebody said, oh yeah, you read, that's a hobby. She said, no, I don't do anything with my hands. So she ordered some books to learn how to draw. And she ordered a book, and she ordered a sketch pad, and she ordered some pencils, and she texted me. I wish I would have thought to put them up. She probably would not let me do that. She texted me some pictures that she drew, and they're not, she's never drawn anything in her life other than in elementary school, but she had a beginner's mind about it. And she said, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be something that brings me joy, right? Something that I can sit down and do for myself. And that's what I'm talking about as we move through this responsibility that we have. When we move from the joyful wonder of children, we sometimes forget about the joy that comes with doing something just for the sake of doing something that brings us pleasure, right? So if that's you in your life and you have a schedule that just keeps you busy from 5 o'clock in the morning until 9 o'clock at night, I invite you to carve out some time, whether you think you'll be any good at it or not, to meet something with Susanna is crawling out of the church to not get in the way of the camera. So I digress. So instead of just taking care of business, we're called to move into something that brings us into beginner's mind, right? To bring us into beginner's mind. But sometimes there's a conflict. On one hand, we need to behave as adults in the world, responsible, reliable. And on the other hand, as spiritual beings, we're called to be childlike, happy, joyful. People say to me sometimes when I haven't seen them in a while and I check in, they say, oh, I've been feeling so bad, I just didn't come to church. What better place to come to when we're feeling down or feeling lonely or feeling like crying? Coming to church is the best place to be, and we are called into that I'm calling you into that. As spiritual beings, as members of this community, to bring your whole self here. Not just your light, walking on air. No need to put on a mask here. We bring our whole selves into spiritual life. When we do that, when we are committed to entering into spiritual life no matter what, we become open and receptive and responsive to what is so much bigger than us. So much bigger than what we can see, what we can taste, and what we can touch. In my vision, in this community, we are all learners. Every single one of us. We come here to learn, to be uplifted, to uplift, to cultivate a personal theology, and to share the convictions of our own minds and hearts. We are explorers, spiritual explorers. I hear people from time to time say, "Oh, I'm church shopping," right? How many here church shopped before they found unity? Right, a fair amount of us, right? And that's a good thing. And yet, when we find the spiritual community that we resonate with, doesn't mean we stop being learners. We are still called to be explorers in our lives. And explorers, by definition, always have something to learn. They head straight for the thing they don't know, right? And when they have thoroughly explored it, when they're finally familiar with something, they go on to something new. We are called to do that too, so that we don't stay static in this life. And we are called in this series to do that, to learn to see as the mystics see. So I never used to think that I was very intuitive, that I was very mystical. You've heard me say this before. My spiritual journey has been fairly pragmatic up until the last 5-6 years, until I finally opened and became receptive to mysticism and to what that looks like in my life. And man, that opened up a whole new area of spirit for me. And that's what we're doing here in this series, opening up ourselves to seeing as the mystic sees, to have such a close relationship with spirit that we don't see any separation. That we recognize that we are human, yes, we are fully human and fully divine. That's what we're doing here. But mistakes will be made. You can guarantee it. So allow me to give you permission to make mistakes. And not only that, but to own them. To own them. And not only that, but to celebrate them. Because when we make mistakes, we just know that we're on a learning edge. Right? We're on the edge of something we don't know. Okay? So I give you permission to say, I don't know. Let's practice that. Let's say, I don't know together. I don't know. That's beginner's mind. Practice out in the world. When somebody asks you a question that you're casting around for some sort of intelligent response, try saying, I don't know. It's a very powerful place to be. When we embrace that, when we embrace the beginner's mind, when we embrace I don't know, we walk in that mystery of not knowing. And then we can let things reveal themselves to us. Then we can be found by wholeness, upheld by the unfathomable, entranced by the simple, and filled with the joy of the one. May it be true for each and every one of us.